We have seen a bump in the disinflationary road. I mean, inflation is proving to be stickier than many anticipated. The Fed did also mention recently that an ongoing increase will be appropriate. What does Powell mean by a job that is not done yet? What will be the Fed's next move? How will inflation affect the markets and economy? Well, in today's video, Peter Schiff shares his opinion on the latest inflation report. Peter's comments come as we got the recent CPI report and when the Fed is widely expected to raise rates at its next meeting. Peter Schiff believes that the Fed needs to do more to fight inflation. To know more details, stay tuned till the end of the video. Let's dive into the video now.
Peter Schiff, what did you hear? I heard an osprey. I heard a hawk saying over and over again, the job is not done. Andy thinks this very well could be the last rate hike. What do you think? What did you hear?
Well, it may be so, but not because inflation is coming down. Inflation is going to get much worse. In fact, what I heard from Fed Chair Powell was a lot of economic ignorance, especially when it comes to inflation. First of all, he said that he welcomes the disinflation. That disinflation is transitory. Maybe he doesn't realize that yet, but it is. But he also claimed that inflation is caused by consumer expectations. He's wrong. Expectations don't cause inflation. Neither do wages and prices. He said he was worried that maybe a wage price spiral could develop, and that's why the Fed wants to make sure it doesn't happen. The wage price spiral was a fiction invented by Keynesians. Inflation is caused by the government. It's caused by the Federal Reserve printing money and then Congress spending money. That's it. And spending is going up. In fact, he encouraged Congress to raise the debt ceiling so Congress can borrow and spend even more money. Ultimately, the Fed is going to monetize that debt. And we've only seen the beginning of inflation. And in fact, Powell said that inflation is creating misery for families. It's the government that's creating that misery and the Fed because they're the ones that are creating the inflation.
There has been a bump in the disinflationary road. January's consumer price index doesn't suggest inflation is reheating in a major way, but it does preview the path to getting prices under control, and that path might be longer and more uneven than it was in the final months of 2022. The path to stable prices will likely be both long and bumpy. The goods disinflation that has driven the slide in overall inflation in recent months appears to be losing steam, and the strength of the labor market continues to pose upside risks to wage growth and service prices. There are many measures of inflation, but the most common is the Consumer Price Index. The most recent CPI data showed that prices rose 0.5% in January, or 0.4% if food and energy are excluded. This was higher than the 0.2% increase that was expected by economists. On a year-over-year basis, from 6.5% in December, the annual inflation in January has fallen to 6.4%. It was less than market expectations of 6.2%. Even so, it is the lowest reading since October of 2021. The CPI is just one measure of inflation, but it is closely watched by economists and the financial markets. The main reason is that inflationary pressures can lead to higher interest rates. So what's going to happen ahead? What will be the Fed's next move after rising 25 basis points in the last meeting? Let's get into the next clip to hear Peter Schiff.
Well, inflation is going to run out of control. But remember, they've already slowed down the pace. They only went 25 basis points. And even if we get a couple of more 25 basis point hikes, it's not nearly enough. And also, you have to look at the effect that higher rates have had on consumer behavior, which is pretty much nothing because credit card debt is at an all-time high. Savings are at an all-time low. So the higher interest rates have not stopped spending and encouraged savings, which is exactly what has to happen to bring down inflation. Meanwhile, as I said earlier, the government continues to increase spending. And if Powell thinks that a slowdown in the economy is going to reduce inflation, he's wrong again. That's actually going to fuel the inflation fire. So the real risk is that we end up with a financial crisis and a much more severe recession than the Fed recognizes. And then the Fed tries to prop up the economy and try to stimulate or combat the financial crisis by creating even more inflation.
U.S. consumer prices rose briskly at the start of the year, a sign of persistent inflationary pressures that could push the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates even higher than previously expected. The Consumer Price Index, which tracks changes in the cost of living, rose 0.6% in January from the previous month. The report comes as officials at the Federal Reserve are grappling with how to respond to a sharp pickup in inflation this year. The Fed has just raised rates by 25 basis points and is widely expected to do so again ahead. Will it help the economy? Peter Schiff believes Powell is going to fuel the inflation fire. Investors are closely monitoring the Fed's response to inflation as it can help shape perceptions about the health of the economy and influence the performance of financial markets. But how exactly can we control inflation, and why is it such a big deal? There are a number of different theories about what can be done to fix inflation. Let's see what Peter Schiff has to say on this matter. Also, be sure to like and share.
Every time we've had a problem, the Fed's solution has been create more inflation. Well, now the problem is inflation, right? The solution has become the problem, and you can't solve that problem with the same solution. You have to acknowledge that everything you did in the past to solve the problem actually made the problem worse. It just postponed the consequences until the future, and we've caught up with it, right? We kept kicking the can down the road, and now we've caught up to the can, and there's no more road. So we have to be prepared for the collapse, but also we have to understand that inflation is not here by accident. Inflation is a method by which government pays for spending. Governments can pay for spending through taxation or through inflation. And our politicians and a lot of other politicians have chosen inflation. Why? Well, because the public doesn't realize that inflation is a tax. If the government raises taxes to pay for spending, then the public gets mad because they see the money coming out of their paychecks and they know where it's going. It's going to Washington. So what happens is we run these big deficits. Governments spend a lot of money. They don't raise our taxes. But now, because they're printing money instead of just taking our money, but they're spending that new money into circulation, the price of everything goes up. We just don't realize that that's a tax because the government can blame it on Putin, or they can blame it on COVID, or whatever they want, greedy corporations gouging their customers. So if we want to stop taxing the people through inflation, we have to either tax them another way, or we have to cut spending. In other words, we have to balance the budget, the opposite of what they just did. Unless we get cuts to government spending, inflation is not going to come down. And of course, the other thing that has to happen is that interest rates have to rise to a level that exceeds the inflation rate by a comfortable margin.
Yes, I have heard
because
that. Yeah.
what needs to happen in order to bring down inflation is we need people to stop spending and start saving. And so why would people save? Well, if they can earn a yield that exceeds the inflation rate, then they're going to get paid to save. Then they'll do it. But if you still hold interest rates below the inflation rate, nobody's going to be dumb enough to save. Everyone's going to spend their money as soon as they get their hands on it, and that is going to make the inflation problem worse. Also, when you look at prices, you have two things going on. You have demand, but then you also have supply. And so demand is being fueled by money printing and spending, but we need more supply. Well, if we have less spending and more savings, you kill two birds with one stone because that reduces the demand, but it increases supply because the money that is saved is then loaned out to businesses to make investments in capital that can increase productivity. So by encouraging savings and discouraging spending, we get less demand and more supply, and that helps reduce prices. But we're not doing that. We're not getting extra savings, so we're not getting additional supply.
Yeah.
And consumers are running up their credit cards, their all-time record highs, maxed out on mortgage debt, maxed out on auto loans. Everybody is borrowing and spending. So prices have got nowhere to go but up.
Even though inflation has begun to decline since peaking at 9.1% in June of last year, it is still more than 3 times higher than the Fed's 2% target and continues to indicate a general increase in price levels, especially for services and housing. Peter Schiff highlights that it's essential that the Fed act now to raise interest rates and get ahead of inflation, but by a comfy margin. If they don't, we could be facing a severe economic downturn. What do you guys think? How will the Federal Reserve control inflation? Will we see more rate hikes in 2023? What will be the Fed's next move? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. For more videos on the economy, crypto, and market, be sure to subscribe to my channel. You can also hit that bell icon to never miss any video. I'll see you guys in my next video. Adios, and thanks for watching.